Welcome to Season 3 of the How to Japanese podcast. This is the Murakami season. Hello out there. Taihen omatase shimashita. I know that at least a few of you have been interested in another season of the How to Japanese podcast, but I've been a little bit busy over the last couple of years, and putting together a full season of interviews is a lot of work, which I've kind of put off for other projects at the moment. But this is a third season for Murakami, for the new Murakami novel. I've been planning this for the last month, and then today, March 1st, Shinchosha announced the title of Murakami's new novel coming out on April 13th. And that title is Machi to Sono Futashika na Kabe. And bizarrely, that is the identical title to a 1980 Murakami novella, which is one of my favorite novellas. Not a very great novella, I would say, but a super interesting novella because of its connections to my favorite Murakami novel, Hard-boiled Wonderland and The End of the World. So I had to do an emergency podcast. Just to give a quick overview of what's happened over the last month, on February 1st, Shinchosha announced that Murakami was going to be putting out a new novel, and they said it was going to be 1,200 manuscript pages, and that was it. That's been the standard process for Murakami since 1Q84. Since that point, he hasn't announced any information about his novels. I think the story is that he was a little bit annoyed with somebody either putting out an early review or some information about the novel got leaked at some point about one of those previous novels, either Kafka, Umibe no Kafka, Kafka on the Shore, or After Dark, one of those two novels, 2002, 2005. And so ever since then, it's been really under wraps. So the same is true here. So it's been the last month we've known that this novel's coming out in April, and just like with the other novels, a title has been announced and there's a very short description of the contents. However, from the title alone, we have a tremendous amount of information about this novel, or at least I do. I think I might be one of the few people who does know this much about this title, because I've been obsessed with Hard-boiled Wonderland and The End of the World for the last 30 or so years, maybe not quite that long, 20 years, since I read it in, I guess that would be the summer of 1999. I spent 6 years blogging the book and doing a close comparison between the original tankobon version, the complete works edition, and then Alfred Birnbaum's translation. I did my own translation of this novella that I'm about to tell you about in 2009 as a personal project, and have looked closely at that work and how it compares with the original novel. So I wanted to do an emergency podcast to get this out there. I've got a lot of other content planned for future episodes this season, leading up to the publication of the novel on April 13th. So I hope that you'll stick with me. I will say that I'll give a general spoiler alert for the entire season that I'll probably be going into depth about all of his novels. In this case now, particularly Hard-boiled Wonderland and The End of the World. I'll try and give another heads up later in the episode when I do go into those details. So this title, let's look at it real quick. It is Machi to Sono Futashika na Kabe, which up until today I would have translated as the town and its uncertain wall. But Murakami has given us English on the subtitle of this new cover that's been put out with a really nice illustration by Jun Tada. I'm not sure who this artist is, but that's how his name is given, and I assume that's Tada Jun in Japanese. But Murakami gives us English on this title, and it's the city and its uncertain walls. I would have said town because that's what Birnbaum translated Machi as throughout Hard-boiled Wonderland, and that gave it a very kind of small, contained feel. It's got a very kind of European feel, run-down, old industrial European feel to that town. where the narrator is living in Hard-boiled Wonderland, or one of the narrators, I should say. Here, though, we have city, which is an interesting choice because it feels much bigger, much more urban. It's not an unusual translation for machi, and in fact, Murakami has used that word to mean more broadly city in his past writing. In particular, in 1983 and 1984, he wrote a series of short stories for I believe it's a Kodansha magazine called In Pocket. And actually, I just paused the recording to go and double check that, and indeed, it is a Kodansha periodical. It's a little bit unusual. It's the size of a bunkobon, so a very small pocket-sized magazine that's been running since 1983. So it's been running since 1983, and actually, Murakami was in the inaugural issue of that with the very first story in this series, which has the overall title Machi no Nagame, view of the city, or views of the city. And those 8 stories would go on to be collected in a collection called Dead Heat on a Merry-Go-Round, which Murakami rearranged the stories a little bit, added an introduction to it, and in which he claimed that all these are true stories that he had heard from people and was just relating to the reader. You might have heard of some of these stories. Let's see. The ones that are translated are Hunting Knife and Nausea 1979. Those are the 2 from the original series that were translated. And actually, he wrote Lederhosen for the collected version. I'm a little surprised that not all of those have been translated because there's some other really great ones. Not all of them are great, but so he translated those under this title Machi no Nagame, which is more clearly city based on the content of these stories. They're all kind of set in Tokyo. My favorite is Taxi ni notta otoko, the man who got into a taxi. And so I can see how it would be translated as city in this case, but I'll be interested to read in the book and see if this city differs. The rest of the title that Murakami gives us is The City and Its Uncertain Walls. So it's plural here. So we have multiple walls, which, again, I was a little bit thrown off by, but not quite as much as city, I would say. In the book, Birnbaum's translation, at least, I would say, makes the wall feel very singular and kind of this entity rather than multiple. But walls could work, I think, pretty easily. So Machi to sono futashika na kabe. That's our title for this new book, The City and Its Uncertain Walls. I'll be very curious to see in English translation if the English translator sticks with that title or if they go with town and a singular wall. That's one thing that I'm going to be looking for. So other than that, one thing we do know is we have a very short paragraph of description that's being listed on the Shinchosha website where you can pre-order the book. And here is a very rough translation of my own of this paragraph. I have to go to the town, no matter what. A story sealed away begins to quietly move in the depths, just like the old dreams unraveled and awakened in the depths of the old library. This is 100% pure Murakami world that will shake your soul. And I'll post a link to that Japanese description. I'm not 100% happy with my translation, but that'll do for now. And but it makes it clear this is the same world from Hard-boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. I cannot believe it. This is absolutely unreal. So 1985, that's when Hard-boiled Wonderland was published. That's 1980 is when this book was published. So that's 43 years since that story, and 38 years since Hard-boiled Wonderland. And Murakami has gone back to the well, to borrow a Murakami metaphor, and is writing about this same world that must really be important to him, I think, if he's writing about it at this point in his career. So yeah, that's what we know so far going into this novel. What do we know about this novella? So this novella was published in Bungakukai, literary journal, in 1980, in September 1980. And the Japanese Wikipedia quotes an article from Bungakukai in 1991. So that would be 11 years later, after Murakami has become a huge domestic sensation and is on the verge of becoming an international sensation. So he has a lot more stature in 1991. I think it's an interview with Bungakukai. He basically says that somebody told him to write a story. He was up for the Akutagawa Prize for Pinball 1973. He had been up for the prize for Hear the Wind Sing the year before, didn't win. He was up for the prize in the next year for Pinball 1973, and somebody said, hey, you should write something. And I guess the idea is that it would have been something that would be around that could be republished if he did win the Akutagawa Prize. And he says that he regrets it, that he shouldn't have done it. That he also says that it was too difficult of a story, that for his skill at that time, it was like grinding teeth to write. So that's where he was when he wrote this story. And but he wrote it anyway, and he published it in Bungakukai. He has not recollected it in a story collection anywhere in the years since, in the 43 years since. He has disavowed it, basically, in the publication of the complete works in 1991. In its complete works for his first 10 years of his career, each volume of the complete works contains a small pamphlet, which is writing from him, talking about the works included in that volume. For Hard-boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, he talks about this publication process of this novella, which is this story of the end of the world sections, basically, of Hard-boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. So more or less, it has the whole thread. Spoiler alert. There, it's got the narrator coming into the town, this unnamed town with unnamed people. It has him losing his shadow, the gatekeeper cutting his shadow off and holding his shadow basically in confinement and using him for hard labor. It has the narrator reading old dreams in the library with a librarian. It has him making friends with an older man living in the living quarters for the workers' quarters. And it has him drawing a map and conspiring to leave the town with his shadow. And so these are all elements from Hard-boiled Wonderland and the End of the World that, published in 1985 that were in this novella in 1980. And but in the complete works, Murakami calls it a failed work. Why is it a failed work? It's messy. It's extremely messy, especially the introduction to the novella and the ending of the novella. It's told in second person, actually, for these sections. That falls away a little bit once you get into the core of the novella. But in the beginning, it's got this messy section where he's personifying words themselves and how they're failed and words are death, and then there's a section where he's talking, addressing you, being this woman, and talking about when he met her and how she described the town where she lived, or at least part of her lived, her real self, she says. But the narrator says that unfortunately her shadow died in the town, and what he knew of her was actually her shadow. And so he tries to go to this town, and by wanting it, literally, that's kind of what she says, just want it, and you can go there. And so this opening section is very messy. It's second person. It's very experimental and drastically different from Hear the Wind Sing and Pinball 1973, which are very straightforward first-person narratives. Pinball 1973, he does have this kind of alternating chapter at times with sections that are about the rat. But for the most part, it's narrated by Boku, the I character, Murakami's prototypical I character, and nothing too experimental. Machito Sono Futakana Kabe, so the town and its uncertain wall, is very experimental, and it feels like he was trying to do something different on purpose, at least with the second person narration. There are times in the other sections of the book, of the novella, that are word for word the same as Hard-boiled Wonderland, and they're great, they're fantastic. But he couldn't pull it together, I don't think, so he called it a failed work. So maybe this is Murakami's attempt to right past wrong, fix an old work that needed fixing. And this is something that he's done a lot before. And actually, I was going to have, and I probably still will have an episode of prediction / what I'm expecting / what I'll be looking for in this new novel. And part of that was going to be a prediction that he's going to go back to an old work. I've been predicting this since 1Q84 and have been wrong every time until now. And the reason why I always make that prediction is because he's done it so many times in the past. He did it for Hard-boiled Wonderland. He did it for Norwegian Wood, which is based on the short story Hotaru, Firefly. He did it for Sputnik Sweetheart. And he did it for A Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. Those Sputnik based on Man-Eating Cats short story, and The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle based on Tuesday, and The Wind-Up Bird and Tuesday's Women, I want to say, is the title for that short story. So he takes a second swing at his works, which maybe suggests that he needed to take a better first swing. I don't know. You could argue that. You could also argue that a lot of different artists and writers deal with the same material, rework the same themes and the same material over and over again, and Murakami's no different. So unfortunately, my prediction now just looks like I'm just kind of calling it like it is, but I promise I could show you the document where I wrote it. That was one of my predictions. So he could be going back and reworking this. He could be going back and writing a sequel. Where did things end in Hard-boiled Wonderland? And that's also one point of comparison with the novella. In Hard-boiled Wonderland, again, spoiler alert. If you have not read Hard-boiled Wonderland, go do that immediately right now. Read it in whatever language is easiest for you to read it. I would not wait to read it in Japanese. I would read it in English first because the Birnbaum translation is incredible. And you still have time to do it. I would say the one warning I have for that novel is that you need to get through the first 100 pages. They feel like a bit of a slog, and then it's all downhill from there. Once Murakami winds up the setting in that book, it really starts to flow. But now the details. So in the Hard-boiled Wonderland version, this unnamed narrator is in the town, wants to save his shadow, is tempted to leave with his shadow, doesn't really know how because they're trapped by these walls, can't really find a way out, but his shadow has found a way out. He also seems to love this woman in the town. He hasn't physically connected with her. He's kind of held off from that, but she's the librarian at the library where he's reading old dreams, and there's this connection there. And he does help the shadow get out. He takes the shadow to the pool, which has a whirlpool in it, and the shadow says, we're going to belt ourselves together and jump in. But he opts not to. The novel ends with him letting the shadow jump in and him walking quietly back to the town in the snow because he feels a commitment to them. He realizes that everyone in the town is part of himself. That's, again, this is the giant spoiler of the novel, that each of the narrators is one another in this novel. The data hacker, data shuffler is the dream reader. The dream reader is the data shuffler, and the town is a representation of this person. And he feels a commitment to all the things in the town, so he resolves to stay there and stick by them. That's not what happens in the novella. In the novella, he sleeps with the librarian. He very clearly loves the librarian, but it's not the same. He realizes that what he loved was this woman's shadow, and it very much takes on elements of death, suicide, grieving that are extremely present in Murakami's early fiction, even in his later fiction too. But I would say those first 3 novels and then Norwegian Wood are all just devastating in terms of the narrator's, the way the narrator is affected by a suicide. And it seems the same is true for this novella, that the narrator cannot connect with this person because they aren't who they used to be. And so he does go with the shadow, does jump into the pool, and does make it out. And actually, we have hints that that's what happened in the first draft of Hard-boiled Wonderland. Also in the supplementary pamphlet to the complete works, Murakami says that when he showed it to his wife, who was always his first reader, she made him rewrite the ending because he got it wrong at first. And my guess is that he had him escape that first time. And what will happen this time? Obviously, the description is that he has to go back, that he has to get back to the town no matter what happens. The old dreams are something, some kind of story is rumbling, and he's being moved. Again, it's very much that Murakami idea of something happening automatically, being pulled somewhere, being attracted somewhere against, not against your will, but just going with the flow. Something happening by fate naturally. And that seems to be what might be happening there. Or is he going to, I assume he'll pick up from the end of the book and then find some way to escape. The threads in that book that I think would be interesting to explore are he never goes to the woods. The woods are where the librarian's mother escaped to, and it's kind of hinted that other people who still have fragments of their mind. So in the novel, people lose all the fragments of their mind, and then that are kind of tied up in their shadows, which is why they become these kind of husks of themselves and aren't really individuals, are closer to just kind of automaton-esque maybe. And so there's these kind of hints that Murakami teases but doesn't really write out in a very typical Murakami way, in a way that maybe a U.S. editor would say, "What's going on here? Why didn't you make them go to the woods?" They go see the guy who runs the power plant, who's kind of torn between the town and the woods, and he also kind of hints at that. And there are these hints that there are ways to live in the town with your mind, but so there's a lot of room to work there, but I don't know whether he goes back to the Hard-boiled Wonderland. The title doesn't really suggest anything about that. What we do know is that in Hard-boiled Wonderland, that what was suggested was that the narrator would fall into this infinite tautology where he gets ever increasingly closer to the moment of death, but never really dies, and is able to live within that tautology. But he kind of ends up drinking beer in his car by the wharfs, I think, by the piers, listening to A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall by Bob Dylan. And it would be a bit of a cop-out if he has him come back alive or wake up and drive back and meet up with the librarian again. I think that ending was too perfect. I didn't understand it when I first read it. But every time I read it now, it makes more and more sense. It's the way you have to end it and to make it a good story. If you let him just kind of keep going, it becomes less meaningful, I think. So I'm very curious to see what Murakami does here and what his goals are with this book, why he's going back to this world, what he's going to explore. He makes it very clear that the gatekeeper is really all powerful there, that there's no way that, for example, the dream reader could become like Neo, I don't think, and bend the way of the town. If he makes it to the woods, maybe there's a way out there, or maybe if the shadow gets out and the gatekeeper doesn't care as long as as the dream reader stays in the town. So, yeah, there's a lot going on. Yeah, we will see. And I'm going to be looking especially for this second person technique that I don't think he's used much. I need to take a peek through After Dark before I do the rest of this podcast, because he did some kind of crazy stuff there. I don't remember if it was second person though. The one other detail that I think is really critical to note here is that we know that Jay Rubin is working on a new translation of Hard-boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. We've known this from David Karashima's book, who is a writer, translator, academic who we're reading when we're reading Murakami, a phenomenal book. Again, you have to pick up that book. You have to pick up Jay Rubin's Haruki Murakami and the Music of Words if you want to know Murakami's full story. Karashima's book does an amazing job of discussing how Murakami was translated, who are these translators, and what that process was like. And then at the very end, he notes that Jay Rubin is doing a new translation of Hard-boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. Presumably, that's close to being finished. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets dropped not long after this book as a kind of tie-in with, oh, Murakami's got a new book in Japan. Oh, it's a sequel to this book. Why don't you read this new translation of that book? I don't know if that's a good idea because, one, Birnbaum's translation is so great. Obviously, I mean, that's what I've been reading for years and years. But Birnbaum also had great translations of Hear the Wind Sing, Pinball 1973, and even Norwegian Wood. And those all got new translations as well, which are also very good. The other reason is that there are sections of that book that I think just needed to go away, unfortunately. A lot of them are in the Hard-boiled Wonderland section and are kind of cringy and a bit strange. There's sections where the characters are singing songs and Russian folk songs. I think that one actually made it in, but songs about their bicycles. And I will be very curious to see if the translation is a complete version. So my theory then, again, is that Jay Rubin's doing a new translation. He's asking Murakami questions about the old versions because we have multiple versions of this novel in Japanese. We've got the original version, which you can find with the Bunkobon. We've got the Complete Works edition, which has Murakami's edits. And he did make a number of changes. And then we've got this Birnbaum translation, which has sections from both versions of those novels. So it does look like he and Elmer Luke, the editor, who you learn about in Karashima's book, and what a tremendous role he played on Murakami's early English translations. It does seem like they had access to both versions. So if Rubin is looking at those kind of minor differences and asking Murakami questions, maybe Murakami's like, hey, let me take a look at this myself. Oh, what about this novella? Maybe I've got the skills now that I didn't have when I was 30 years old to tell this story the way I really want to tell it. So that's the other thing that could happen, is that it could just be a retelling of the End of the World. And that's going to be my final answer. This is a retelling of the End of the World section with a brand new Murakami skillfully woven narration. Maybe he does an introduction a lot like the one we saw in Killing Commendatore, where it's this brief section where he's talking to the man without a face, and then it kind of goes into the narration. But here it would be something like what he did in the novella, not in second person, maybe in second person. Who knows? That would be very interesting. Maybe that was something that Murakami wanted to play with. And then it's just a retelling of the End of the World stories. I don't know. I'll be very curious to see. If it is just the End of the World sections, then he's basically, I would say, doubled the content there, because I think the length will be about the same length as Hard-boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, maybe a little bit shorter, but in which case he'd have to make up a lot of room, because so much of that novel, half of that novel, was with the Hard-boiled Wonderland sections. So that's what I know. That's all that I think there is out there. I don't know if you know anything else, let me know. Please send it my way. If there's any mistakes I made here, things I neglected to mention, please send them my way. howtojapanese@gmail.com. I'd love to hear, and I will absolutely get that information included in a future podcast or a blog post. I'll be very curious to see what, if any, attention this gets to that original novella. Does it get republished in Japan? That's something that publishers love to do here. You don't really need much of an excuse to publish something in Japan. This would be a phenomenal reason to do a side-by-side of that original version with this new version. I'm going to be surprised either way. I'd be surprised if Murakami let something that he called a failed work back into public view get published widely. And I'd be also surprised if the publisher says, gives in and says, no, we can't. We're not going to publish it, because it seems like too good of an opportunity to not get it out there again. And maybe at this point, Murakami's kind of not quite so sore about the state of that novella when it was published. In the past, he was also not embarrassed, but not confident about his first two novels. And that's why they took so long to get an official English translation. And there was just the Kodansha International versions, which will come up in a future podcast episode, actually. So yeah, that's another little thing. And at this point, it's 10 at night on March 1st, and I'm just rambling. So we're going to shut it down for today. I'll be back soon. This is probably not going to be on a regular schedule. It's going to be probably 6 or 7 episodes. It's going to end up with the publication on April 13th and some kind of instant reaction. But stay tuned, and I look forward to talking to you again.